Welcome back, dear friends. I'm Gopal Mandal, and today we are going to study tragi-comedy, which is an interesting genre of film, theatre, and of course English literature. In this video, we will know what is actually tragi-comedy, what are the elements of this particular genre, and we are also going to study the history, the background of this particular genre, along with the arguments which are given in defense or against of this genre. So let's get started. Let's see what is the meaning and definition of tragi-comedy. Tragi-comedy is half tragedy and half comedy mingled harmoniously together. If we see carefully the term tragi-comedy, it is made up of two words which are tragedy and comedy. These are two kinds of dramas. The blend or mixture of these two kinds of dramas into a new one is called tragi-comedy. For example, this circle represents tragedy and this circle represents comedy. When we take the elements, the half of the elements from tragedy and the half of the elements from comedy, and when we mix the elements of both these categories, which are tragedy and comedy, and made a new one, a new kind of genre. It must be tragi-comedy because we made a new kind of drama with the mixture of the elements from tragedy and the elements of comedy. So it is called tragi-comedy. I hope it helps you to understand tragi-comedy. Let's go ahead. It is distinct from tragedy that contains comic relief and comedy that has a potentially tragic background. In other words, it can be a tragedy with a happy ending, or it can be a tragedy with enough comic relief that the mood of the entire play is improved. So, dear friends, you can pay attention here. Comic relief, and also in here, tragic background. In general, it is a tragedy that contains comic relief. It means the author in the middle or at the end of the play puts some comic relief or humor, and it is also a comedy that has tragic background. It means in the middle or end of the play, the author puts some miserable condition, some suffering, and we can also find some kind of loss of love, life, etc. So, it is a tragedy which ends with some kind of happiness, and it is also a comedy which have miserable condition or any kind of suffering at the end of the play. If we conclude tragi-comedy in a sentence, it is a play which is neither a comedy nor a tragedy, but both, because it contains elements of both. Mostly the characters in tragi-comedy are exaggerated, and sometimes there might be a happy ending after a series of unfortunate events. It is incorporated with jokes throughout the story just to lighten the tone. The term tragi-comedy was first coined by the Roman dramatist Plautus in the 2nd century BC. The word denoted a play in which gods and men, masters and slaves reverse the roles traditionally assigned to them. Gods and heroes acting in comic burlesque and slaves adopting tragic dignity. In the prologue to Amphitryon, Plautus announced that this play would inhabit a new form of genre. He said that I'll make it a mixture, let it be a tragi-comedy. I don't think it would be appropriate to make it consistently a comedy when there are kings and gods in it. What do you think? Since a slave also has a part in the play, I'll make it a tragi-comedy. Dear learners, in the third line, the words reverse the roles is very important here, which tell us that the characters belong to high society, play inferior role in tragi-comedy, and the characters belong to low society, have dignified roles in tragi-comedy. According to traditional dramatists, a tragedy must be happen with the person of high society like king, prince, etc. But here is the difference which tell us reverse the roles, where the characters belong to lower society plays the roles of the people of high society. The main purpose of tragi-comedy is to describe the dual nature of reality, where both modes can coexist, perhaps simultaneously. The interweaving of both aspects gives both a comic and tragic view of life. This genre is particularly used in dramas and theatre, since tragic plays focus exclusively on protagonists, while comic plays are devoid of focus and concern. Therefore, plays that fell between these two categories were developed. These types of plays present both modes of life, such as happiness and misery, pleasure and pain, through absurdity and seriousness. Tragi-comedy is a play with a double ending, and this ending is happy for some characters and unhappy for other characters. There is a mingling of comedy and tragedy. Aristotle condemned such a mixture because he felt that such mixtures spoils the tragic effect. According to him, a tragedy should be tragic throughout. But Shakespeare has proved that tragi-comedy also is a great work of art. His Merchant of Venice is a great example of tragi-comedy, which ends unhappily for Shylock and happily for Antonio, Bassanio, Portia, and others. Similarly, in his tragedies, he provides comic relief by bringing the fool or some other comic characters. The grave digger scene in Hamlet readily comes to the mind in this connection. Ever since Shakespeare's great masterpieces were written, the comparative merits and demerits of tragi-comedy were hotly debated. But on the other hand, Dryden and Dr. Johnson strongly defended this form of drama for its nearness to life and nature. They regarded it as one of the chief glories of English stage. In the 2nd century BC, Plautus, the comic dramatist, attempted something of the sort in his Amphitryon, which he called Tragico-Commedia. But that was perhaps a mere freak of genius, not the result of a deliberate artistic aim. The English form arose in the reign of James I under Italian and Spanish influences. It was the dramatic counter of the prose romance so popular in England and other European countries at that time. Beaumont and Fletcher's A King and No King finally established it on the English stage, and Shakespeare handled the form magnificently toward the end of his career. With numerous variations, the dramatic romance maintained itself on the stage till the closing of the theatres in 1642. After that, it may be said to have disappeared, though the tragi-comic element was indispensable to the sentimental comedy of the 18th century and the serious play of modern times, which are, in Sidney's words, neither right tragedies nor right comedies. Later on, the reflection of this technique can be observed in Henrik Ibsen's Ghost and the Wild Dog. That's why George Bernard Shaw said of Ibsen's work that it established tragi-comedy as a more meaningful and serious entertainment than tragedy. Anton Chekhov's tragi-comedies include Uncle Vanya and The Cherry Orchard. Modern tragi-comedy is sometimes used synonymously with absurdist drama, which suggests that laughter is the only response left to man when he is faced with the tragic emptiness and meaninglessness of existence. Famous examples of this modern type of tragi-comedies are Samuel Beckett's Endgame and Harold Pinter's The Dumb Waiter. Let's try to understand some arguments on this genre. Milton condemned this genre in his preface to Samson Agonistes as to vindicate tragedy from the small esteem, or rather infamy, which in the account of many it undergoes at this day, which other common interludes happening through the poet's error of intermixing comic stuff with tragic sadness and gravity, or introducing trivial and vulgar persons, which by all judicious hath been counted absurd and brought in without discretion correctly to gratify the people. Addition later on also called it one of the most monstrous inventions that ever entered into a poet's thoughts. All took their stand on the classical principle of unity of action. None of them ever explained exactly why a mixture of the tragic and the comic was unnatural or inartistic, and their declarations did not go unchallenged. Let's try to understand what Dryden said in defense of this genre. He said like this: "Cannot but conclude to the honor of our nation that we have invented, increased and perfected a more pleasant way of writing for the stage than was ever known to the ancients and moderns of any nation, which is tragi-comedy." Later on, Dr. Johnson also defended this genre, raising the question, what is there in the mingled drama which impartial reason can condemn? I am repeating this question again for you. What is there in the mingled drama which impartial reason can condemn? Dr. Johnson sees no impropriety in mixing pleasure with pain. Therefore, he comments, "Since it is not only common but perpetual in the world, may surely we allowed upon the stage, which pretends only to be the mirror of life." Later on, Allerdyke Nicol shared his views in his famous book British Drama as follows: "Tears and laughter lie in close proximity. It is but a step from the one to the other. We feel nothing incongruous in practice in laughing at the jest of Mercutio and at the same time witnessing the tragic story of Juliet and her Romeo, just as we feel nothing incongruous when in a novel of Dickens we pass from hilarious laughter to the most tearful forms of the pathetic." Tragi-comedy is not only a ludicrous mixture of tears and laughter, as some critics blamed it an inferior kind of play, but a beautiful combination of the two. However, there are strongest arguments in defense of tragi-comedy. It is rightly said, great work of art by Shakespeare. There are many films which can be considered examples of tragi-comedy, as they combine both tragic and comic aspects. It will also help you to understand better this genre. Here are some names on the screen: Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, O Whither, Where Art Thou? The King's Speech, Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, Lars and the Real Girl, Sideways, Big Fish, etc. Let's try to understand tragi-comedy through Freytag's dramatic structure. Here I request you to pay attention on the board. This is a diagram which is called Freytag's dramatic structure. Remember the name. Freytag's structure. If we look at the footing system of tragi-comedy, the rising action is tragedy and the falling action is comedy. It is a complete tragedy up to a certain point, from exposition to climax, and it is also a complete comedy thereafter, from climax to denouement. You can also call rising action the growth of the plot. Growth of the plot. Here the falling of the plot or its downward course. Its downward course. So remember, it is climax which separates tragedy and comedy. It changes from tragedy to comedy. So here climax plays an important role. William Shakespeare used this footing in his Cymbeline, The Winter's Tale, and The Tempest. Here I end today's lesson. Thanks for watching and see you soon.